Oi, oi, it's your boy. The women's featherweight division deserves only scorn and derision. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday the 12th of June, following UFC 28 mid, $80 for utter shite, except for Charles Oliveira versus Beneil Dariush, which was banger. Actually, there is two other fights on this card that I think I enjoyed. But luckily, lots of other stuff happened at the weekend. Teofimo Lopez returned with an impressive decision over Josh Taylor, who also returned with an unimpressive decision loss to Teofimo Lopez. And one had some fights on that were also pretty good. So we'll start with the actual main event, the people's main event. Beneil Dariush said it wasn't, but he got knocked out, so we don't have to listen to him at all. No, this was a really good matchup. And I think, I want to say before this starts, like, Beneil Dariush had done enough that he deserved a title shot. I think it was a daft situation that he was in to have to fight Charles Oliveira for the title shot anyway. Obviously, that was to do with Volkanovski taking the jump up to fight Islam Makhachev. But once that was done, really, you could have just given Makhachev the downtime and given Beneil Dariush the title fight. I mean, there was plenty of case to be made for him before that with the streak he'd been on. And certainly with people like Gaethje and Poirier, at least one fight from title contention. I know we've got to pretend that Michael Chandler's always within reaching distance of a title shot, but like Beneil Dariush had been putting work in and getting wins for a long old time. And I've been singing Dariush's praises since way back in the day because I thought, before that Alexander Hernandez fight, I was still super hot on him. He'd lost he'd drawn with Evan Dunham in a bit of a surprising one. But before that, he'd been beating the shit out of Edson Barbosa, and Barbosa sort of threw a Hail Mary flying knee while backing up midway through the second round. He'd been getting the brakes beaten off him. Beneil Dariush was making him look extremely bad, and he connected this flying knee, and then no one ever spoke about Beneil Dariush again until he knocked together like 9 wins in a row or 8 wins in a row, or whatever it was this most recent run. But he took that fight against Alexander Hernandez at short notice, and Hernandez, while he's not great, as his nickname implies, he is dangerous, and he was short notice. So he came out switching stances, knocked out Dariush very quickly, 40 seconds in. And then Dariush had to rebuild all that momentum. But what this fight has done now is that people are looking at this matchup between Oliveira and Dariush. You know, Oliveira, a completely different type of fighter to Islam Makhachev, and they're going, well, clearly Makhachev would have done the same thing, but quicker. Because he's higher ranked and he's beaten Oliveira, therefore, and it just doesn't work like that. The intrigue of the Dariush-Makhachev fight is that Dariush's takedown defense is excellent. His bottom game is good when he uses it because he only ever really uses it to get up. And he's very seldom on the bottom. And he goes after people and fights aggressively. If you look at... Let's talk about the matchup in this fight. Both men are guys who benefit enormously from that thing that I'm always talking about, like confidence is half of striking for a lot of people. Dariush was not a great technical striker, and he still isn't, but he more than made up for it with aggression because he trained under Rafael Cordeiro, and obviously they're always hard sparring over there. But if you watch the guys that come out of that gym, or basically out from under Rafael Cordeiro, they learn that it's better to be the hammer than the nail. He doesn't produce like elite counter strikers. Anderson Silva came from shoot box and trained with Rafael Cordeiro and stuff like that, but he was very much his own breed of fighter. And if you watch like Anderson Silva's Pride run before he leaves shoot box, they're basically trying to get him to be a fighter that he isn't. His success starts when he leaves shoot box, goes to Nogueira, starts fighting off the back foot and fighting as a counter fighter. Now, Beneil Dariush, like Verdum, like Vanderlei, like basically everyone else that's ever trained out of... Is it Kings that Rafael Cordeiro trains at? Learn to get on the front foot early and push people. And he does amazingly, using the body kick, the head kick, the left straight, the left overhand. He has a decent right jab, actually. He was really upsetting Edson Barbosa with that. But aggression is a huge part of his toolbox. Charles Oliveira, much the same. I mean, his counter-punching is probably more dangerous than Dariush's because of his very crisp punching mechanics, but he doesn't fight nearly as well on the back foot as he does going forward. All his teeps and knees to the body and his counter left hooks into clinch entries and things like that all works through backing the guy up, putting him under pressure, and keeping him on the back foot. So this was sort of like a collision of trains. If you look at Islam Makhachev, what he does that these two don't is that he very much fights on the back foot. He's much more of a counter fighter on the feet, which is kind of a weird mix with his style of grappling, which is very much aggressive, smothering. So the idea that, like, this fight tells you anything about Dariush Makhachev, let's nip that in the bud right now, because, like, the intrigue was always the matchup between their styles and not this baby-like view of the world that, like, 1 will always beat 2, 2 will always beat 3, 3 will always beat 4, 2 would never lose to 4, but sometimes 2 does lose to 4. That's what happens. You know, that's why styles make fights. Sometimes number 1 loses to unranked late replacement. You don't see it an awful lot in MMA because, obviously, what's the point in replacing your title challenger with some guy that no one knows? But that is what people mean when they say styles make fights. This was a really interesting style of matchup between Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira, because I felt pretty sketchy about Oliveira's chances coming into this. I mean, obviously, there's the Canada curse. I think he was like 0-5 in Canada or something like that. But he has also had a good deal of trouble with southpaws in the past, particularly because his best weapon is the left hook. And it's not impossible to apply against southpaws, but it is different against southpaws. And he also can run himself onto overhand lefts and so on. I mean, think of the counter that Makhachev dropped him with. And then, of course, there's Dariush's takedown defense, which, if you knew anything about Dariush, you know, not the most athletic-looking guy in the world because he's got the greying hair and the sort of dad face. And I think it was Heavy Hands were pointing out that he has no arse at all, despite being a professional athlete, has no glutes. But he's a absolute hoss in the clinch. Most people would have better luck double-legging a horse than they would getting Beneil Dariush over if he's got an underhook. You can watch his fight with, like, Diego Ferreira, guys like Thiago Moises. You know, Tony Ferguson couldn't get anything going against him. I mean, Gamrot's probably the best example, because Gamrot will attempt every takedown under the sun, chain them all together, and he'll keep doing it for 15 minutes, and he had a real hard time with Dariush. So yeah, Charles Oliveira came out, put him on the back foot, threw a head kick immediately, telegraphed his intentions there, but they hit the clinch. He tried to lift Dariush. Dariush just turned him onto the fence, was like, not having it, mate. Charles came off the fence trying to trip him and then just fell to guard. And then I was going, not great, because I've seen Diego Ferreira, who I consider a very good bottom player in MMA, in the attacking sense, not in the using his time the best sense. I mean, part of the reason he lost the Dariush fight was that he was just so happy to go to his back to attack. And every moment you're on your back, you're losing in the eyes of the judges. You know, some of these judges, it could just be done on time on top, basically. They ignore the strikes being thrown in the fight. But this is really interesting because, like, I thought, not great to be on the bottom of Dariush, who is very elite jiu-jitsu-wise. He left competitive jiu-jitsu quite soon after getting black belt, I believe. But he had some great matches, like either purple belt or brown. He had a couple of matches with Crone Gracie, gave him hell. He's very, very good. So you got some Charles Oliveira attacking off his back, and again, it was the confidence that does it. Like, even against guys like Makhachev, he looked pretty good working off his back because he just keeps attacking, and he doesn't sit there doing nothing. You know, you can get roughed up while attacking someone, but you'll probably get roughed up more if you're not doing anything. He did a nice little elevation, sort of to deep half guard, but then threw his leg over for the reap, ended up in the saddle, and going belly down on the backside of the saddle, which is pretty dangerous. Leg lock wise, we always talk about how Charles Oliveira uses leg locks, but never really submits people with any leg locks, because the whole point is to make stuff happen. So I'm not saying like he doesn't try to tear people's legs off, but he uses the threat of tearing people's legs off to make stuff happen. But Benny managed to slip his knee free, his knee line, and did a really nice little continuation to try and pass. Ended up back in closed guard. The thing that really surprised me in this one, Beneil Dariush, so skilled everywhere, but his ground and pound, I mean, it really did look like he's just been practicing body head drills on the heavy bag, because the moment that an element of movement was introduced from Charles Oliveira, and that element of movement was not like spinning for inversions or anything. Like the element of movement was that every time Benny threw a punch, Charles would bring his elbow up, you know, the old answer the phone defense, take it on his arm, and then hammer fist him straight from there in the face, like those old Casey. Casey was the thing that Portuguese thing that Batman did in Batman Begins, which then became Defense Lab, which has some of the funniest like self-defense videos on YouTube. But it was all silly hammer fists, you know, back and forth, and basically Wing Chun with hammer fists spazzing out. But yeah, Oliveira's landing these hammer fists on the bottom, Beneil Dariush is hitting either Oliveira's elbows or hitting the mat. And it was cool the first time because it reminded me of Fedor back in the day. He'd be battering people on the bottom. He'd stand, throw their legs past. He always did the throw by pass. Just grab the legs, throw them by, and throw the punch at the same time. You know, how Hendo knocked out Babalu, how Shogun knocked out Overeem. Sometime more recently that people won't think I'm a boomer when I give those references, but was it Babalu that Hendo knocked out? Or was that how Musashi knocked out Babalu to win his first regional title? Yeah, Fedor used to stand, throw the legs by, and then dive in behind a punch, and sometimes he'd miss completely and hit the floor, and you'd hear this thud, and it looked like you looked at it going, oh, that probably hurt, you know, his hand or his wrist or something. And the guy always had broken hands because he was always just spazzing out and hitting with weird bits of his hand. But he'd just turn around and face the opponent and keep going, and that was part of the Fedor demeanor. But he'd do that once in a while. He'd miss a big punch and hit the mat. Beneil Dariush basically missed every big punch he threw here. He hit the mat about 5 times in the space of a minute. I am really, I'm sticking on this point for a while, but I'm really surprised how bad Beneil Dariush's ground and pound looked just as soon as someone started moving underneath him. So Giles kept attacking, and he was able to hit a stand-up, and he did hit the stand-up with an overhook, which is interesting because I think a lot of people get stuck with the mindset that they just have to get the underhooks and start standing up. And good fighters, they're either going to not give you the underhook, or if they're a really good guard passer, someone like Damian Maia or Beneil Dariush, they're going to give you the underhook, but then squash it and turn to face your hips and start backstepping through your guard and so on. Or, like Rafa Mendes back in the day, he used to sit on top of people's half guards, and Drysdale used to do this too. Like, he'd sit on top of people's half guards and put his hand underneath the web of his hand in their armpit, but bow his elbow out. So they'd see the underhook, they'd sit up and get the underhook, but he'd have a hand inside their armpit, and he'd be able to squish them back down and start working for Darcy's because they had the underhook, but they weren't really able to move him over the top of them. Google Rafa Mendes, R-A-F-A, Mendes, Anaconda, because there's a clip of a roll where he does this specific anaconda about 7 times to some poor black belt. But yeah, people will bait you to get bad underhooks, and also they'll just deny you getting underhooks. So standing up without an underhook is quite important. If you watched Makachev versus Volkanovski, all his get-ups were off the whizzer or the overhook. Every time he got, his butt hit the mat, he'd keep an overhook and he'd get his other hand to the floor and he'd just get up. And yeah, you come up and the guy might have underhooks, but you're up and fighting off underhooks rather than on your back fighting off underhooks. So Oliveira hopped up with the overhook and one hand free, and then he dug the underhook, hit Benny with a nice knee that looked to take a little bit of the wind out of him, and then broke away. And then he threw right straight into a high kick, which is, everyone's talking about it now because it's having sort of a breakout year despite being the oldest combination in the history of kickboxing. But throwing the punch and then kicking the head off the same side is brilliant because if the guy reaches to parry with his hand, his hand isn't there to guard, which is doubly effective when you're talking about southpaw versus orthodox, because on your rear side, all you've got is that arm. You don't have your shoulder. You can't duck down behind your back. The open side, as we call it. When you're kicking into the open side, it's only the arm you're dealing with. Or if they try and slip your punch, they keep a nice tight guard, maybe their hands by the chin, Mike Tyson style, and they slip your punch, they're leaning into the head kick, which is what happened to Mark Hunt against Mirko Krokop in their second kickboxing match, I think. Oh no, one of them was special rules or something like that. But it's one of the hardest shots I've ever seen a human absorb and get up before the 10 count. It was really incredible. Because Hunt fell for the punch, hook, line, and sinker, slipped straight into the left high kick, fell on his arse, and then got up. But yes, just recently a load of people have been getting clipped with it. You could say the Leon Edwards one was an example of that. You got who's been leaning into the kick. Caceres versus my boy Juicy J, Erosa. It's having a moment. But one of the great things about it, as you saw with this one, is that you only need the guy to flinch out of position. If you whack in a head kick on the open side as hard as you can, and the guy's forearm is in the way but not ready for it, his forearm's going to hit his own head. You'll probably get a little bit of your foot on his head, and you can wobble him up, even through a guard. Which is what happened here. And then Oliveira swarmed to finish, did a nice stepping right hook as Beneil was sort of sauntering along the cage to get away. Beneil attempted a double. Oliveira did a really nice, long step go behind, very fancy Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style one, as opposed to the wrestling running circles sort of one. Benny rolled through, ended up on bottom half guard. Charles pounded him out. really nice. And the reception this guy received in I was about to say in Canada, incredible. I think the Charles Oliveira thing, I love the idea of watching him fight Islam Makhachev again. I thought their first fight was really compelling, and I thought it was a good, well-fought fight until the very quick ending, which was a bit of a surprise because, Makhachev, not really a one-punch fight changer up to that point, so that was quite exciting. But I could watch them fight 100 times, just the skill level. To be honest, I could watch these two fight 100 times because of the skill level. I think I'm always saying, like, that mid-division stuff, like Gamrot, Ismagulov, Kutateladze, Sarukian, I could watch that forever in any combination. But even if Charles Oliveira is not the best fighter in the world, I think it's a really good story. He came into the UFC so highly touted. He hit a lot of speed bumps along the way. A lot of people said, that's him worked out. And then he put it all together and became champion. Obviously the title run only lasted a little while, but now he's such a star for them. And he was sort of just an exciting guy in the middle of the card or on the prelims for a very long time. Even when he was racking up bonuses and things, it was just Charles was a guy on the card who turned up lots. And he had exciting fights, but maybe people didn't really know him as much as they should. And very recently, in that last sort of couple of fights up to the title and since the title, he's just exploded and become, I think, as close as the UFC has to a star. Now, of course, when we say star, always temper your expectations because there is no Conor McGregor. There is no second Conor McGregor. If you look at the tough ratings, even Conor McGregor's not Conor McGregor now. So, and he's not Habib. But I think, in terms of like working your way up, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which is the thing I'm always criticizing people for saying about the UFC, like the Sam Alveys of the world being like, well, if you just perform, you'll get paid what you're worth. It's obviously insane to get 16 finish of the night bonuses and 3 fight of the night bonuses and so on. People should be getting paid their worth or close to it without having to do that. But Charles Oliveira is as close to the ideal UFC fighter as you could get, and also succeed and have fame and wealth and being beloved. I would really like to find out when the switch was, though, because I don't know if he was this big when he fought Kevin Lee for the interim title. Was that the real title? I can't remember now. Anyway, that fight behind us. Feel sad for Beneil Dariush, to be honest. I mean, he didn't get to make his... he always says something weird in his post-fight speech, whether it's trying to convert people or trying to get a Tesla. But I do feel kind of bad because he had such a brilliant run going on. He's been beating very difficult opposition for a long time. And now because he lost to the number 2 guy in the world, it's like, sorry, hype train derailed, get to the back of the queue. But anyway, other stuff on this card. Amanda Nunes fought Irene Aldana, and almost nothing happened on one end of this fight. Well, I know, she hit her with the Pena Blitz very early on. Amanda Nunes backed to the fence, ran in, spazzing out, got chinned with a counter right hand, and Aldana must have saved up all her energy for that spirit bomb, because for the rest of the fight, she did fucking nothing. I looked at the fight metric and I was going, I think this is a lie. I think this was produced by AI or something, because she didn't throw 140 strikes. She didn't attempt that much offense. She threw one punch and that was it, basically. Checked out, didn't want to be there. And then Amanda Nunes just, looked like $1 million because she was fighting a heavy bag. And at the end she retired. And I do think this was hilarious because honestly, people have been like, well, that's the Pena fight done. Even though they're 1-1, that's it done. It's gone. It was fluke that Pena beat her in the first place. It wasn't. It was Amanda Nunes not having answers to a very simple counter that she just ran onto again and again. The simplest answer would be stop jabbing in really hard. But it is way funnier because Juliana Pena is such an annoying person generally. Whenever she is asked anything, she's really annoying. It was so funny, the footage of her as Nunes is announcing her retirement. And I think some people knew about this because there was a spate of, I say a spate, they signed 3 bantamweights, women's bantamweights to the UFC this week. So people knew something was up because that division's just been dead in the water for a long time. Or stagnant, I'd say. But during her retirement, this footage someone's posted of Juliana Pena just shouting, "Don't compare yourself to Anderson Silva. We're not done." Just freaking out. And I'm sort of torn because it would be very funny if she just becomes sort of a footnote on Amanda Nunes, but it was also very funny when she beat Amanda Nunes through very, very basic boxing. I mean, the good news coming out of this is that, well, actually, before we do that, the legacy of Amanda Nunes, I dump on her a lot because she's, queen of a really bad division. But she can't control her opposition, So well done to her for beating all the people they lined up to fight her. Except Juliana Pena. And I hope she, gets out healthy. I hope she made tons of money. And, they showed her little girl there on Saturday. And I hope she lives a happy, wealthy life with her family. With that being said, there's some bizarre takes coming out of this. Oh, hang on. I'm going to read you one. Dramatic reading of tweet by Clint McLean. Amanda is GOAT. Not the WMMA GOAT. The, full stop, GOAT, full stop. Undisputed, full stop. Double champ. Defended both belts. Retired on top. Thank you for everything, Lioness. Some weirdo says they agree. Clint says, I agree, and let's not even get into the human side of it. She's an incredible role model and loving person. Amanda is far more a champion than Jones. Just bizarre, You can hate John Jones as a person all you want, but the competition he's faced. Firstly, in his division, if he fucks up and they chin him, as Amanda Nunes got chinned in the first round, it actually matters. Someone said, how would you rate Amanda's skill technically? And someone else said, like a ladies bantamweight Ngannou. And I thought, yeah, like that. But if Ngannou were fighting guys with the same skill set, but they didn't have the heavyweight power, that's what we're talking about here. It's such a game breaker that she can actually hit with force. And everyone else she fights never has a puncher's chance. It's one thing if Ngannou could fuck up at any point against some bum like, I don't know, Mondragon or Guto Innocente, and they could chin him and knock him unconscious. Amanda Nunes, she did have one of those nights where she did get caught, and that was the end of her title run until she won it back. But that was about 100 of the same counterpunch hitting her. Not one, and then her just having no chance to get back in the fight. So yeah, anyone doing that in men's divisions above bantamweight, you've got a chance the guy just knocks you unconscious at any point. It's an entirely different game. It's like if you turned off damage for one character in Street Fighter. But on the upside, they are talking about just they just said they're going to retire the women's featherweight division, which is good because there was no point. It was just there for Cyborg and to do the Amanda Nunes fight. And then after that, it was just to sort of pad Amanda's resume. Fighting the same lasses from bantamweight, but at featherweight, If they made a super heavyweight belt for Stipe when he was in his prime, and he fought all the same guys, but the limit was 285 instead of 265. So anything else on this card, this bizarre Canada card with very little effort attached to it? Mike Malott versus Adam Fuggett. I mean, Mike Malott was supposed to win. Adam Fuggett has been very in his career, whereas Malott is on a nice little run. Malott did almost get killed entering the arena, though. He came in the entranceway, and fans were leaning over to high-five him, and he wasn't high-fiving back. And then the railing just collapsed. And if you go back and watch the footage, there's a guard underneath. Some poor guy just gets this whole railing thing with 5 fans on fall on his head. Hope he sues the shit out of the arena. But man, Adam Fuggett has a weird fighting stance. He puts his chin out and the top of his head back. He's got real nerd neck going on while he's fighting. His head's forward of his shoulders. But yeah, this was interesting. Mike Malott landed a really good body kick in the early going, and he kept throwing high kicks on the open side, then throwing to the body. Knockout punch that he landed in the second round. He tried it in the first round, and I went, oh, that's an interesting attempt. And then he landed it in the second round and knocked him out, which was pick up the right leg as if to kick, because he'd been kicking him in the body with front kicks and round kicks, and then step through with a right hook and a left hook, and he chinned him with both. It was really lovely. But his wrestling was good in this. He did a lovely step around the corner and... is it a sag throw? I forget what it is. Over underbody log, you step around to the overside and trip him. That lad who fought Kaya Sakura hit a dozen of them in that fight. Yeah, like Mike Malott, he's fun. And his only loss is to Hakeem Dawodo, on a regional Canadian card way back in the day. Actually, Duodo was supposed to be on this card, but like that's being finished by Hakeem Duodo, who doesn't finish anyone. Really weird, because Malott is, sharp and tough, and Hakeem Duodo will, even if he chins you really hard, he'll stare at you for a bit and then consider throwing a couple more strikes before the end of the round. Dan Ige versus Nate Landwehr, good fun. The first round I thought, damn, Landwehr's done in this. Well, firstly, because he got dropped on his fucking head. His back of his head hit the mat, and he went, oh, and then he got up and carried on fighting. And he fought for 3 more rounds, which is really incredible. To start with that handicap right off the bat, just give the guy a free knockdown. But yeah, I thought the first round, it looked like he'd gone, damn, this dude has power and he's hitting me and I can't see it coming. I'm not going to do anything. And respect to Landwehr, because he came out in the second and third round and he really did put it on Dan Ige. He was getting chinned with the bigger punches, but I like what he was doing. Ige doing the stance switching. I think this was one of the fights where Ige's style, you actually got to see it work. Because a lot of fights, even the last one against Damon Jackson, where he beat the shit out of Damon Jackson, he does some things that you're going like, why are you doing that? He'd hurt Damon Jackson, then corner him against the fence, and then he'd like throw punches and dart past Damon Jackson while he's on the fence. So if you dart past him while you're throwing left straight or whatever, a southpaw left straight, or you dart past him to your left while you're throwing a right straight, you're putting yourself on the fence and then he just circles out into the open again. So it kept happening that he'd hurt Damon Jackson, then let Damon Jackson off the hook. But in this fight, you got to see it work, really, because Nate Landwehr was coming forward all the time, and Ige would hit some punches, angle out, hit some punches, angle out, keep changing stances. He'd float around the ring and change stances in motion, which is perfect. That's what you want to see all the time, not just switching on the spot or running in. In the third round, the punch that he hurt him with immediately coming out of the gate, he drifted off to he started circling off to his left from orthodox, brought his feet level, stepped back into southpaw. Landwehr's chasing him down, doesn't notice, gets hit with a short left straight and stunned. But Landwehr was doing good work. He was trying to jab and then either dip or pull and come back with counters. He was going first and third, as they say. That's what got him hurt in the second round. He jabbed and pulled, but he pulled away from one punch and then he came back in onto another. So because Ige was countering in combinations, which is something we're always talking about, because he was countering in combinations, Landwehr got punished for trying to pull and then return. But then I really liked Landwehr. He'd keep throwing the right hand against Ige's guard and then grab the head and start kneeing, which is a great thing to do against a guy who's like half a foot shorter than you. So he's hitting with good knees to the body. He hit him with a couple of good knees to the head, actually. I think one of the ththings that I was thinking through round 2 and round 3, which only really came up towards the end of round 3, or he only started doing at the end of round 3, was elbows. He doesn't really use them in open striking exchanges, which really would have helped him, like Sandhagen versus Yudong. If you realise that you don't have the hitting power of the opponent, or he's got the chin and his punches are hurting you, but your punches aren't hurting him, start throwing elbows. Same counters, step in as if you were going to throw a right hook, but instead just throw the elbow. But he only really went to the elbows in the clinch late in the third round, but they were working really well, actually. So, the impression I got from this, I mean, everyone else's impression seems to be like, damn, Dan Ige blew him out of the water, blah, blah, blah. I think, without that early knockdown, or if this fight was 5 rounds, I think Landwehr was doing pretty well come the end of the third round. But I did think this was one of Ige's better performances. I think there's no truer gatekeeper in the UFC than Dan Ige. I mean, people use gatekeeper for all sorts of things. People think that Robert Whittaker's a gatekeeper because he's the number 2 in the world. He dropped a very close decision to the number 1 in the world, and now he keeps beating all the up-and-comers. I suppose he's gatekeeping the title shot, but that's all he's gatekeeping. If you can beat Dan Ige, you're top 10. If you can't, he'll blow you out, basically. Like, he really impressively beats everyone who isn't very, very good, and then loses reliably to everyone who is, with the exception of a bad decision against Edson Barboza that he won. The rest of this card was basically slop. Eric Anders and Marc-Andre Barriault opened the main card, the paid portion, and they had a little back and forth scrap. I think they won fight of the night, actually. Barriault threw a right kick to a right straight. I was talking about this in my article about Yuki Yoza last week. The old Andy Hook special / Lyoto Machida versus Rashad Evans. But Andy Hook came into kickboxing in his third fight. He fought the K1 world champion, Branko Sikotic. He beat him exclusively with left round kicks to left straights at the same time, punching before the foot comes down. threw it like 100 times. But yeah, Barriott did it here, broke Anders' nose, knocked him down. Anders bulldogged back in, kept going forward, landed some decent punches in the clinch. The Eric Anders game plan is to attempt single legs and fail them. I've watched him a few times and been like, that's a cool idea. You pick up the single leg, you run onto the fence and you come up into the clinch. But he doesn't do anything from there. And he succeeded on one single leg in this entire fight, so he's not using them for takedowns. Yes, he has a really boring style except when he's getting his ass kicked, and then suddenly he's interesting. But they gave it fight of the night. Imavov versus Curtis was interesting because, no, it wasn't actually. It was middleweight. These are two middleweight fights. Meh. But Imavov still got that problem where he goes straight back on a line. Chris Curtis still got the problem where he doesn't cut the ring. There was a moment in the first round where Curtis backed Imavov onto the fence and then watched him circle out and didn't do anything. And this is the guy who complains all the time that his opponents are running. And you're like, if you're not going to take advantage of them getting stuck, you can't complain about them running. But then they clashed faces, basically. It wasn't even one guy trying to headbutt the other. They both came in face to face. And Curtis got the worst of it. And it was called off as no contest. Anything else on this one? Ayman Zahabi versus Richie Lung. Ayman Zahabi refused to check a single low kick, took them all, but reached down to grab them and threw overhands. And eventually, he managed to bundle Richie Lang backwards enough that he hit him with a left hook and knocked him down and out, or rather finished for the TKO. It was a cool knockout, but it's one of those ones where it's like, you got the finish and you won, but I'm not super convinced by what actually happened in the fight, And that was about it. Maria Oliveira was fun stuff because Diana Belvita... Well, firstly, she jumped back on a leg lock like Karine Silva did last week, but the girl immediately came up on top of her. And to throw you back how far that's been happening, UFC 1, Ken Shamrock fends off a takedown by Royce Gracie easily, cow catches him into bottom position, stands up in his guard and jumps back on a leg lock, doesn't put a knee in the middle. Royce Gracie comes up into mount and finishes him. And then... Ken Shamrock did it the same year against Masakatsu Funaki and lost exactly the same in Pancrase. But yeah, Maria Oliveira, man, hilarious fighting style. She fights like some of those street fight videos you see where the guy's leaning back at the waist away from every punch, but also throwing flailing hammer fists at the same time. And if I say it every fucking week, but if someone's leaning back, double jab because it gets you on top of them, and then they're leaning back and they can't go anywhere when you hit them with the right hand. But double jabs in MMA, they're like mana from heaven. There's fuck all. It's thin on the ground, and when it happens, I jizz my pants. So other stuff this weekend. I'll briefly touch on one, and then we'll talk about Teofimo Lopez versus Josh Taylor on the Boydcast. The one Fight Nights 11, I think it was. The main event was crazy. It was Ursul versus Menshikov. Ursul is in a really good spot. How many fights is he on the He's now on like an 18-fight winning streak or something like that. He's both the kickboxing and 4-ounce Muay Thai champion in his division in one. And in his last fight, he beat Sinsamut by beautiful left hook to the body, toes turned in, very short punch, just winded him completely, took the air out of his lungs and finished him in the fourth round. This one, he comes out in the first round, goes southpaw, steps up with a left knee, just misses the face, and slaps his left hand across. Throwback to that article I was just talking about, creating power in ways that aren't throwing your body weight into it. So he wings the punch a little bit wide. Something Andy Risty was always doing. And Errol Zimmerman used to throw a right knee and swing a right overhand. Really more of a right hook. He'd just swing his arm out wide, and he got a tremendous amount of power without his feet being on the floor, or with one of his feet being off the floor. So he did that, but he just sort of like brushed the front of this guy's forehead, Menshikov. And Menshikov goes down and gets up, stumbles all over the place. They had to call the fight off. It was one of those ones where I don't believe it was fake, but if you watched that as someone who's like a casual viewer of combat sports, you would absolutely think that was a fixed fight because it happened in like 40 seconds. The co-main event was Cade Ruotolo versus Tommy Langaker in a grappling match. I was thinking about writing something about this one because it was it's very inside baseball. It was very leg lock heavy. But Langaker was using a lot of K-guard, the outside control position. Basically, like, there was a big movement towards inside position, which is butterfly hooks and so on. If you watch Gordon Ryan, a lot of his game is based around butterfly hooks, kicking the legs through the inside of the opponent's legs and pulling them into leg entanglements that way. Then there's outside control, which is things like De La Riva guard and K guard, where your legs are outside of the opponent's legs and you're inverting onto their legs. You're spinning over and things like that. So what Langaka would do would get like half guard or reverse De La Riva, which is like a standing half guard. Then he'd free the inside leg, put it on Keita Rotolo's hip, and start entering the K guard. There was a really nice Estima lock attempt from Keita Rotolo. He's one of the few guys still doing the Estima lock, but he grabbed it and he put his knee on Tommy Langaka's neck while he was going for it. It was very reminiscent, actually, of his match with Mika Galvao at ADCC, which I said I'd write something about as well. So maybe I'll link those two together and do something in the week. I'm doing a lot more writing at the moment for the Patreon boys, so if you're interested in that, maybe I'll drop that there. But the really interesting thing was that Langaka is not known as a no-gi guy. It's quite new for him to be competing this much in no-gi. He's a gi guy, and he'd been training at the B team. I'd seen him popping up in their videos, and he actually looked really, really good. Keita Rotolo couldn't pass his guard for the full 12 minutes or whatever it was. A lot of people felt like Tommy Langaka won. They gave it to Keita Rotolo, who's their defending champion. But I think one of the nice touches, for one, with their grappling stuff, is that they award points, on the judges' scorecards, however those work, but they score close submission attempts or bites, what are they called? Catches, they call them. But the guy who decides that is the ref, and then they get Vitor Shaolin Ribeiro, who's a jiu-jitsu legend in his own right, to be the ref for the grappling matches, which I think is a great shout. Anything else on there? There's a guy called Zoltsid Teg, because the MMA fights always largely suck in one. They've got about 5 good MMA fighters, but this guy Zoltsid Teg from Mongolia, he fought a guy he was 6-3, and he fought a guy with 12-2 record, and he got murked. But you knew that they were sort of like ashamed of that because the announcer gave Fremenov's record, but didn't say anything about Zoltsid Teg's. Oh, and then Superbon. Superbon fought Ozcan, and Superbon's coming off that loss to Chingiz Alazov. Before that, he was on one of the best runs in kickboxing history. Beat Petrosian by a head kick knockout, and Murat Gregorian and Sitachai. This fight, you should watch it because Superbon can throw up high kicks from anywhere, and he does. And there's a lot of ways to land a high kick. There's people who just pound in the same thing over and over again, and it sets up the high kick. So like Mirko Krokop throwing the left straight all the time sets up the high kick because the guy will either parry it or start dipping to the outside, or he'd throw a lot of body kicks to throw up the high kick afterwards. And that's an easy setup. But what Superbon does is that he will counter almost all you do with high kicks, and he'll also throw them as he's leaving range. I was talking about this with Blood Diamond the other day, saying like he wasn't very good in MMA, but you could see why his teammates thought he was weird and difficult, because he'd throw 2 punches, lean back, and then as he was leaning back out of range, he'd throw the high kick and sort of fall out of range with his leg going up through the air. But man, this knockout is incredible. Well, firstly, in the first round, he catches a teep, steps back into southpaw, and then throws a high kick with his shin like up by the knee, connecting against Ozcan's double fists raised guard. So Ozcan was ready for these high kicks because that was a wicked fast counter high kick, and it could have killed him, and it didn't get through. But in the second round, Ozcan throws a beautiful 4-punch combination. I think it was like left hook, left uppercut, right hook to the body, right hook upstairs. Absolutely gorgeous. And it sort of sends Superbon stumbling off to the left. And Superbon just throws up his high kick as he's leaving range in that direction. And Ozcan's, naturally thinking like there's no possible way a high kick... I mean, obviously he's not even thinking about it, but he couldn't have possibly believed that a high kick would hit him then. I called it throwing a basketball back over your shoulder and getting nothing but net. Because that's what it was. Superbon just threw it up as he was leaving range, and it happened to connect, basically ended the foot across the chin, completely unguarded, and knocked him out. It's one of the most beautiful head kicks I've ever seen. Reminded me of some of the Remy Boyansky ones back in the day. So I've been breaking out the stretch machine, and I'm going to start throwing them up as I leave range. There was a points karateka called George Kataka, who used to enter, you enter like the two of you throw a right-handed punch at the same time, a reverse punch, and neither of you scores because neither of you clearly lands first. But then he'd step out to the left and throw the high kick up as he was leaving, and the guys would always walk onto it. Or Wonder Boy, when you think of his first knockout in the UFC, he landed a couple in whatever that quote-unquote kickboxing league that Chuck Norris launched was. He throws a right hand, and as they circle around to his right, he just throws his right kick out to 90 degrees, and they'd circle into it and get clipped over the back of the head. It was incredible. Anyway, yeah, go watch those fights in one. The Superbon one of the best striking performances of the weekend. Probably the best, actually. Absolutely gorgeous. And if you're into grappling shit, Ruotolo versus Lanka, watch it so that I can write something about it. But I reckon that'll do us for today. I'll be back midweek with the Boycast and possibly something written as well. If you want to get in all the extra shit I do, and there's been a lot of it lately, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Imagining how salty Shevchenko is over this. Bless.